All right. Josh, are your reeds all ready?
As ready as it'll be.
Oh. Do you carry spares?
Oh yeah, I probably have
How
about
many spares
20.
do you carry?
Yeah, I usually carry about 20 or 30.
20,
Yeah.
20 to 30.
Although I think it's more just kind of for a comfort to know I have them. There probably maybe three of them that I'm most likely to actually use.
Okay.
It's
And
just
how
nice
long
to
does
know
one
that they're.
last? How many games does each last? I know Major League Baseball, they say the ball lasts about 5 pitches. How many concerts can a reed last?
That's really funny that you say that because I often think of I'm really into baseball also, and I often think of myself as being a manager of pitchers when I'm using my reeds. That I'll save my closer for the big concerto or something, and just or big solo or something like that. So it's playing hours. Probably playing hours is the key, and it just depends on the reed. But maybe like a couple 2 to 3 weeks of good playing, and then it sort of gets used for different purposes. Sometimes I'll have kind of it's like wearing an old comfortable shoe that I can use for many, many months afterwards, but I wouldn't necessarily use it for the big events.
All right. Well, let me just say right now that if you have just joined us, you have not missed anything. You did not come into us in progress. We were just having a little pre-opening conversation. It's like the overture, right? It's as the audience gets settled. So hello and thank you everybody for coming to Virtual Symphony Mixer number 43. Number 43, which is a celebration of the release of Joshua Ranz's brand new album, which actually is not officially released until when?
Friday.
Until Friday. So you're ahead of the curve on this one. I'm Alan Chapman. I'm happy to be here, not only because I really love what Joshua's done, not just here, but in general, but also because of my longtime affiliation with Pacific Symphony, having done all of the pre-concert talks for the Classic Series since 2008, way back in the early aughts. So I am just delighted to have been invited to be your host today, and equally delighted, if not more so, for the occasion that calls for us to gather together. So we are going to get to the recording. We will talk about many dimensions of the Bach recording that Josh has made. But before we do that, we need to delve into Joshua Ranz, the early years. And I would like to just start by asking a question that I love to ask great musicians, and that is, did you come from a musical family?
Well, technically, neither of my parents were actually professional musicians. My mother, though, went to the School of Performing Arts, which then merged with the music and art and became LaGuardia High School. This is the famed school, as most people know of it. And no, we did not dance on the tables in the cafeterias, as is in the movie. But in any case, so she went to performing arts for dance. Was a really wonderful dancer, and then decided to have a family, and we ended up kind of becoming center stage for her, so to speak. And my father was the main inspiration for my love for Bach. We used to listen to a lot of Bach, and he plays recorder. He still does recorder. He plays in a little recorder consort in New York with some friends. So he started me on recorder. I started that when I was about 4 or 5, and then I switched to clarinet a few years later. Not professionals, but both of them, the love of music, and there's something in the blood that passed on to me. So I would like to think.
And this early activity is taking place in Hastings, New York, which only people from New York City erroneously refer to as upstate. As a matter of fact, I grew up not far from Hastings in Poughkeepsie, and we resent when New Yorkers call us upstate. Upstate is Schenectady, Utica, Troy. We are southeastern New York. And what were the opportunities as you went to school? Was there the usual school band and orchestra?
Yeah, well, in middle school, I played, yes, elementary, I was taking private lessons. And then starting middle school, I played in the band. Actually, I think I was playing in the high school band already in middle school in Hastings. Hastings on Hudson, by the way, technically
Yes.
is the name. Hastings on Hudson, New York, 10706. and yeah, so I played all through middle school in the band and taking private lessons as well. And then I think, going into high school, my parents realized that I probably would do better with a more enriched musical experience in high school. So that's why they had me go to LaGuardia. And I also went to Manhattan School of Music
Were you
pre-college.
commuting to do this? Were you commuting to
I
New York?
was.
Yeah.
and actually, technically, I might get in trouble for admitting this now on the air. But Westchester, having a Westchester residency, was not technically legal going to a New York City public school. But we actually, my stepmother had an apartment on 76th and West End, so we used that as our official address. And I did stay there a couple nights of the week, but many of the nights I would take the one line up to top to Van Cortlandt Park, and then 2 buses in through Yonkers, through Getty Square up to Hastings, and then I'd have to walk a couple blocks from the bus stop. But the funny thing was that I actually was not eligible to get a full subway pass because I technically lived so close to the school. I only got a half-fare bus pass. So I had to kind of work my way, taking the subway all those years in some unofficial way. It was back in the 80s, you could get away. I would use my friend's old from the previous month, or just sort of slide through. I did 4 years of that. Probably couldn't get away with that now.
That's astonishing. To go back, to turn the clock back a little, whose idea was the clarinet?
My mom. Yeah, and I think it was because I was playing recorder. My brother had been playing recorder, and then he's a little older than me, and then I picked up the recorder. My mom told me that I just picked it up and just started playing Mary Had a Little Lamb on my own, just kind of by ear, and then they realized it was going to be something I'd be really interested in doing. So I think I took a few lessons on the recorder, but it was mostly just for fun. And then a few years later, they realized that if I wanted to play an instrument, in a normal ensemble like a band, that clarinet would be a good transition from the recorder.
Did it become clear at some point early on that you seemed to be better than the other clarinetists?
Yes, although I can tell kind of a humbling story, which is sort of surprising, perhaps. So I was usually, first chair in middle school, and even in high school at LaGuardia. Even there, I was top chair, and also Manhattan School. And then I applied. They had this what was called NYSSMA, NYSSMA, which was, I think California has
New York
a similar.
State School Music Association.
Right. So we'd have the auditions for the All-State. There was all county, and then there was All-State. And I auditioned for it. And they scored up to 100, and I got, I think, a 98, and I was like, okay, I'm ready to go. And they had placements for orchestra, band, and wind ensemble, and the plum position was in the orchestra, maybe first chair in the orchestra, and I found out I was placed 3rd clarinet in the wind ensemble, and I was kind of like, wait, what? I got a 98, and I didn't understand it. But I wanted to have the experience, and I went up there and I played in the wind ensemble, and I was blown away by the level of playing, the wind players. And my thinking about it, my theory about it, coming years later now, I kind of came to this realization that a lot of rural areas focus on winds because the bands, the marching bands. So whereas in the city, it's more strings and piano. So ironically, I probably didn't have as much competition in New York City as I had against some of these guys in the rural areas on clarinet.
Great. And since I'm aiming to get to the recording, as much as I would love to get all of the sordid details of your academic career, let's just mention undergraduate at Harvard and graduate school at Yale. So maybe at least to deal with them, ask what was the most profound thing that happened to you musically speaking at each of those institutions?
Ooh, that's hard. Well, Harvard, probably the tour. I played in the orchestra, and it wasn't, Harvard didn't, I don't know if it's still the case. Now, back then, everything performing-wise was all considered extracurricular. You couldn't even take lessons for credit. But I did play in the orchestra, and it was really incredible. I would look forward to every single rehearsal we'd have. I learned so much of the repertoire playing with the Harvard Radcliffe Orchestra with Donald Yonatos was the conductor. And in my senior year, he took us to Eastern Europe to a tour. We went to Vienna, Prague, Budapest, Olomouc, which is a town outside of Prague, I believe in it was Czechoslovakia back then, and it was just, and we played Shostakovich 5, and it was his 1992, and the wall had only come down a few years earlier. And it was just so eerie to play Shostakovich 5 in Hungary and Budapest. And they would applaud, I think they still do it today. They applaud together.
Right.
And then it kind of would build up from there. And I'd never heard that before. And it was a little intimidating. I felt like there was almost something Stalinist about it, which seems so ironic, of course. But yeah.
And then did it seem logical and inevitable that you would go to graduate school and continue with clarinet?
No, actually, because I mean, I wasn't even thinking that music would be a career at that point. It wasn't until my senior year. I played it because I loved it, but it wasn't until my senior year at Harvard that I decided I was going to try out for some of the top conservatories for my master's and see where I was compared to others that had actually been doing their undergrad in a conservatory. And I just sneaked into Yale, waitlisted, and then got accepted. And that was for me like, okay, now I'm going to do it. I'm going to try it. I'm going to try the career. I figured that was a kind of a good chance to opportunity. So, and then you asked about my most, well, I mean, this ties into the recording. I would say one of the most amazing moments for me at Yale was hearing this great bass clarinetist come up and play the first prelude from the first suite, from the G major suite, and he inspired me. That was sort of the seeds that started my idea about this recording.
That's great. But before we leave graduate school, when you're applying to graduate study in instrumental performance, part of the consideration is the teacher you're going to study with, correct? You think of who's where. Are there distinctly different schools of clarinet playing?
Yes. Well, it's hard to define in America because I think you have different European sounds, like the French sound and the German sound are quite different. I think American sound is kind of a synthesis of both of them. And it's sort of been suggested now that things have gotten to the point where almost all American orchestra clarinet players have a similar sound. You don't hear as much variety as you heard maybe 100 years or 50 years ago when they were coming from Europe with these different styles of playing. But I think of the American sound as being kind of a synthesis, not maybe quite as really. There's a very dark German sound, and then there's a light, more kind of free-blowing French sound, which fits the music, of course, that they play. And so I wanted to study with David Schifrin, and I had wanted to actually before. I actually wanted to go to Yale for my undergrad, and I didn't get in. So, and I wanted to work with David Schifrin as an undergrad, which one undergrad gets that opportunity. But so I still wanted to study with him. I had his recording of the Mozart Clarinet Concerto on Bassett Clarinet with George Schwartz and mostly Mozart. And I loved that recording growing up. And so I always knew that I wanted to study with him. So that was it, David Schifrin. I really wanted to work with him.
Okay, so the quick recap here. We didn't mention you were born in the Bronx, which would make you a native Yankee Stadium person.
Big Yankees
okay,
fan.
so yeah. Don't
Sorry.
say that to me. Okay.
Sorry.
And don't say that to anybody in Orange County for that matter.
Right. Remind them of the 09 ALCS. Anyway, yeah.
So you grew up in Hastings-on-Hudson. You went to college in Cambridge, Massachusetts. You went to graduate school in New Haven, Connecticut, and you started your career in Honolulu. I think this requires some explanation.
Well, so basically, after 2 years at Yale, and I had really fallen in love with the bass clarinet, I decided that I would start auditioning for positions on bass clarinet. Or I was going to audition for any position, but it turned out that a bass clarinet position opened up in Honolulu. They actually did audition tours where they wouldn't make you go to Hawaii, so they would come to LA, Chicago, and New York, and they would have each person play live there, and then they would send, if you were advanced, and then they would listen to the different players from the different areas and decide, who they would give the position to. So I auditioned for the New York one, and it was my first audition, and I was just like, okay, I'm just going to try it out and see what happens, just to get the experience. I didn't even really expect anything of it, and I won the job. Actually, I was runner-up for the job, but the guy who got it decided not to take it. So I ended up that started my career right out of school, and I felt extremely fortunate to be going right from school into a job. Although when I got there, I found out that it was a kind of a mess financially, and that's a whole other story. But it was still an amazing experience. Great players, great colleagues. It was just so wonderful, and it's Hawaii. I mean, it was beautiful, and I met my wife. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so it is my understanding that it was also something significant of a personal nature that happened in Hawaii. Is that true?
I met my wife there, Laylee.
What would be significant?
English horn player in Pacific Symphony. We met in Hawaii. She also had just gotten the job, In fact, I think she also was the runner-up, and the person turned it down. So because two people turned down their jobs, we met, which is funny. So we met there, and I was really amazed by her sound on the English horn. Hadn't heard English horn played like that before. I remember we were playing Sleeping Beauty. We were doing an all Tchaikovsky program, and she played the English horn solo from Sleeping Beauty, and I was really taken by that. We didn't start dating though until about 3 or 4 months later, but we became good friends, and we'd go to the beach and hang out. And then we started dating. And then I flash forward to a couple years later. This is sort of a fun story that she and I decided that I didn't have a permanent position in Hawaii. She was given a permanent position, but I was filling in for 1-year jobs there. And turned out Pacific Symphony had a position for both bass clarinet and English horn. One was on September 1st, the other was on September 8th, 1997, I believe or September 9th. I think it was like 8 days apart. The bass clarinet audition was first, and I, all behind a screen, there were about 35, 40 people, went through the rounds, and I won the job. And at the end of it, I went up to the committee. They met me, and I said, "Oh, I just happened to mention that my wife's also, or girlfriend at the time, was going to be taking the English horn audition in 9 days or whatever." And they was like, "Great, well, maybe we'll see if it works out." And then she, then has to woodshed, work really hard over those times because she didn't think I was going to win the job, so she didn't actually prepare until I won the job. And so then she worked really hard, and all behind a screen, similar 35, 40 people, and she was the last one standing. And then she came out and she said, "My boyfriend just won the bass clarinet job 8 days ago." And they were, of course, were excited. And Jim and Debbie Cantor, the first and second clarinet players at the time, were a couple, so they were happy to have another couple in the orchestra.
Yeah, I think this might be of interest to people who are listening. The number of people who audition for a position, and remember that people at the live audition have already been narrowed down from the pool of applicants. For bass clarinet, how many? I'm not sure if you said how many candidates were there for bass clarinet.
Back then, I think it was about 35 to 40. But like you said, I remember I had to send in. Well, actually, for Pacific, no, I didn't. For others, I've had to send in record tapes, but there may be that they have the option. I believe that most of the time they have the option if they think that you don't have enough of a good background they won't let you. So yeah, so 35, 40, but I may have gone up by now. I know for principal auditions, 100 is not uncommon, 150. It's and the competition has just become that much more fierce than it was back then. So.
Yeah, well, I'll just throw this in. The most surprising number to me, I had a student at Colburn who decided, as you said, do an audition just so you get used to the whole procedure, and he went to audition for the tuba chair at the Minnesota Orchestra. And when he came back, I said, "So how many people were there?" 150.
Yeah, that's probably the standard. That's probably normal now. Yeah, even for bass clarinet, that's probably not.
Now the other question is, it's not necessary for a clarinetist to also study the bass clarinet, or is it?
No, and in fact, I hadn't touched a bass clarinet until I got to Yale. I had only played clarinet, and so for me, it was really this experience. I guess I'll share. This is a good time to share my experience where when David Schifrin would have a lot of guests come up and do master classes and lessons with us over the 2 years that I was there. So I got to work with a lot of great players, and the one that really changed my life was Dennis Smiley, who's a bass clarinet. He recently passed away a few years ago, and he played as an extra with the Metropolitan Orchestra and New York City Opera, and did a lot of contemporary music. But the main thing was just to hear his sound. So he came in his master class. He played the first prelude, from the G major prelude, and I had never heard the bass clarinet sound like that before, and I never had heard any Bach played on either clarinet or bass clarinet played like that before. And so that, I look back now as just like a really, big moment for me. And I decided I wanted to learn how to play bass clarinet. So I took some lessons with him. He helped me figure things out on the instrument. And I basically learned the bass clarinet by playing movements of the Bach cello suites. Before I touched excerpts or anything else for auditions, it was the Bach cello suites that I learned the instrument on. Yeah.
Taking a cue from what you said about his sound, how do you make your sound? How do you find and produce your sound on a bass clarinet? Or, I mean, this is a question to be asked about any instrument, but specifically today, because we're talking about the bass clarinet, how do you find it, and how do you make that sound? That is your
A lot of squeaking and a lot of trial and error and doing it wrong. And when I first started, it was just a mess. But I had good guidance, and I think the main thing from Dennis was not just what he was telling me, but also just hearing him and being like, realizing, okay, this is the sound I want. How do I do it? Maybe I need to tweak a little bit here or there. A lot of it from a technical point of view, and I tell students that play clarinet and they switch to bass clarinet, you need to take in more mouthpiece. You got to it's a bigger mouthpiece, so you got to take in more to get the reed to really vibrate. And it has to vibrate really far down. I don't want to get into the technical stuff here, but you do need to have the sound, a full, really big sound. You have to use a lot of air and let the reed really vibrate to make it work. But again, it was a lot of trial and error, just fine tuning exactly the position to make it work. And then the different registers, a low register, upper register, they're different. It's a different embouchure. There's a lot of overlap, but it is a different embouchure than clarinet. So it takes, and there are a lot of clarinet players that play a little bit of bass clarinet, kind of get by on bass clarinet, but you can tell they're not bass clarinet specialists. They're just kind of getting by. So yeah.
Okay, well, since I know you have your B flat clarinet with you as well,
Yes, I do.
could I invite you to sort of do a comparative demo of the one we usually think of and the one that's over to your left,
Sure. So
or
maybe,
right, as the case may be?
yeah. Let's see. I'll just play a little of the saraband on both instruments just to kind of get
Okay.
it. That's the opening of the saraband from the first suite.
Hmm.
I'll play the same thing on bass clarinet. So it's exactly an
Both
octave.
beautiful.
Thank
Both
you.
beautiful.
And I fingered them exactly the same way both times. So the bass clarinet comes out exactly an octave lower than the clarinet when you finger them the same way. And that was the other nice thing, of course, for any clarinet player that wants to play bass clarinet. You don't have to learn a whole new fingerings. There are some alternate fingerings, but generally you can use your same technique from one to the other. So that's nice.
That's great. Okay, so here's my idea. We've been doing a lot of talking. I think what we should do is, before we talk about the whole cello suite project, both the history of it and the realization of it, maybe we could hear something from the album. And I was thinking, since it's such a familiar movement, the prelude from the first cello suite might be a good place to start. just wonderful. You know what I especially love, the 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 tone as you go down to the low notes in the low end. That sound, only the clarinet, whether it's just a B flat clarinet, but especially the bass clarinet, it's the only instrument capable of making a sound like that. It's
Thank you.
just, it's indescribable. I think of it as woody, but it's not just that it's woody, it's also rich and full. Wonderful sound. Now, let's before we talk about the entire project, let's talk about that movement in particular. It's my understanding from a conversation we had that there were certain challenges to translate that cello movement into a bass clarinet movement. What was involved?
Okay, well, so obviously the most obvious challenge is playing continuously. The cellists can play without having to breathe at all, or if they breathe, it doesn't matter. It doesn't affect their playing. Whereas we have to breathe. So there's one trick that can be done, and I do it a bit, but not completely here, is something called circular breathing, where you blow out and you breathe in through your nose and you blow out through your mouth. And I do use that on occasion and in that movement, but generally, I discovered that a much easier way to do it and a fun way to do it is by playing around with audio editing to make it sound seamless. Although that was a project unto itself that I kind of trial and error had to make it work. In fact, this was the first movement that I recorded, and then I completely scrapped it. After doing all of the other movements, I came back full circle and did it again at the end and completely redid it because I never felt like I was able to truly match all the different edits in a way that sounded seamless. And so I had better experience by the end knowing how to make that work. Even just the reed can change on you in the middle of a recording that just doesn't match what it was doing in the beginning. So I had to do a lot of experimenting. And this version, I feel like came out, much more seamlessly than the first version. And I worked with Laszlo Mezzo, the wonderful cellist and audio engineer in Pacific Symphony, who was my master engineer for this. And he helped me figure out a way to make it work this way with the reverb and splicing and all overlapping sound kind of thing. And now I don't even remember. For a while, I was like, oh yeah, that's the spot. That's because I knew because I had done it. And now I don't even know where the spots are. So. Yeah.
Okay, so now let's back up and talk about how this came about. Could I ask you over what period of time from when you first thought I want to do this to the point when you actually did it? Are we talking about months? Or are we talking about years?
Years. So, I mean, like I said, I learned bass clarinet playing the suites, but I never really thought I was going to do much with it, except just to use it as an opportunity to learn how to play the instrument. And then my orchestral career took off, and I focused on learning all the wonderful bass clarinet solo repertoire, all the repertoire in the symphony. And then, I started doing some recitals at some of the schools that I teach, and I decided it'd be fun to maybe play this one or two movements, or maybe a full suite. So I got back into playing them for that reason. But even then, I wasn't really sure what was going to happen. But two things that really made me decide to do this. The first thing was buying this instrument. This is a buffet is the standard, what many clarinetists and bass clarinetists use. Maybe 80-90% of professionals around the world use buffet, a French brand. And I have been using buffets since I started. But this is a relatively newer line of buffets called the Tosca. And if you look at it says Tosca on here, and I have that as well on my clarinet. It's a kind of their highest end line. And I discovered that the Tosca, when I found the right instrument, they're all different. Each one is a little bit different, like a reed. You have to try them and find the right one. But when I found this one, I discovered it had just this beautiful upper register, singing lyrical quality in the upper register that was missing from my other instruments. And that was so important. If you hear at the end of the first suite, going up to the upper register, it needs to have that lyrical quality, and it was missing. So I bought this January of 2019, so 2.5 years ago. And around the same time, I had also been hired to teach at UCLA, lecture in clarinet at UCLA. And they told me one of the perks of teaching there was being able to access their amazing recording studio, the Mo and Evelyn Austin Music Center recording studio. And I had actually auditioned for my job there in that room, and I was just really loved the acoustics. So they said that we could use it to make a recording, and then even they would get an engineer for us, and all on UCLA's dime. So I was like, this is great between the instrument, and so that's what kind of like got me started to really take it seriously. So I really dug in with the movements, decided which suites I wanted to do. And then I recorded, but I actually ended up only recording the second suite at UCLA. The other two I recorded at home because I got better and better at doing my own home recording, and I wanted to be able to have the takes evolve. Like I would make a take, and then I would listen to that take. I'd be driving in traffic the next day to work, and I'd listen to that take, and I'd say, okay, that was not so good, that was good, blah, blah, blah. And so then I'd go and do another take, and I was just constantly, I would have 5, 6, 7 takes that I would have before I finally liked for each movement. So 1 and 4, I did it that way at home. Number 2 is kind of the most straightforward one. So I had decided early on that if I was only going to do one suite at UCLA, it was going to be number 2. So
let me ask you a little about the instrument. Its sound is superior to others. You're telling me. What is it about the instrument?
Well, I wish I knew the technical part of it, what they do with the wood. I find the same thing to be true on the Tosca clarinets as well, that they have a singing quality. I actually think, because I played on standard what are called R13s, which are the standard buffet clarinets, and they actually are probably a little bit darker sounding, which I always wanted the really dark,
right,
rich, warm, dark sound. And I find with the Toscas that they still have plenty of depth to them, but they have something in the center that rings. It has like a ringing quality to them. I don't know how they do it. It was something about the wood or the shape. We'd have to ask somebody at Buffet to answer that question. I just know from my experience.
Yeah, they won't. Probably a trade secret.
Yeah, right? Actually, I went to Buffet once. So very quick story. I went to Buffet.
I've been to many buffets.
What's that?
I've been to many buffets.
Yes, different kind, smorgasbord. But anyway, I went to the buffet factory outside of Paris in the late '90s, and they showed me around the factory, and each place had its own like assembly line where they would make. This was where they did the G sharp key. It was like right here. That's all they did with the G sharp keys. Blah blah blah. And then they had the machine where they drilled the holes in the wood, and I was about to take a picture, and no. That's our secret. So anyway.
No way. Yeah. So let me ask you then. I guess a two-part question. They are related. Number one, there are 6 cello suites in all. You recorded 3. Why did you choose these 3? Part 2 of the question is, might there be a volume 2 with the other suites, or is there something less appealing to a bass clarinetist?
Let's start with the second question. I don't know. I've obviously thought about this now, whether or not I would do the other 3. It took a lot of work to put together 1, 2, and 4, and it was wonderful work. But I got to make sure that it's going to be the same kind of rewarding experience as it was working on 1, 2, and 4. 1 was an obvious no-brainer because it's everybody knows it, and you just have to do 1. And I loved it. And that was the one I learned the most early on, also. So that was clear. 2 is probably like I said, the most straightforward. It just fits well with the breathing. I didn't have to do a ton of editing, although the minuet I did a lot. But other than that, I didn't have to do a lot of editing. It came fairly directly, and it also was in a good key. We have, without getting to the technical part of it, that we play in a different key than the cello. But I wanted to make it sound like the cello, so I was transposing. So G major becomes A major, D minor becomes E minor. That's the second suite. So those are good keys. That was part of it. Now I could have done 3. I could have done 4. I was struggling between them. They're both absolutely amazing. I think the reason why I chose 4 is because of the key. It's in concert E flat major, which is one of the best keys for the clarinet. It's F major for the clarinet, and it has the sound of the low F. Just has a sound. You're talking about the right. Lower register. There's something about the low F that just is like, it's almost like the perfect note on the bass clarinet, and it starts. Maybe we actually, Alexei, if we could actually segue into playing a little bit of the prelude to number 4. This is it's a whole long line of arpeggios, and I also thought this prelude worked well because it has kind of a pipe organ quality, and that also lends itself to the sound of the bass clarinet. So we're just going to play the first part of the prelude, and then you stop a little bit after a minute in. So that's the you could sort of see what I mean about the pipe organ quality to it, and just how the arpeggios kind of fit well on the bass clarinet. So that was actually probably the main reason, that prelude. Well, and also the saraband. I realized when I started getting deeper into these movements that, to me, if you were to ask me what was my favorite movement of all 18 tracks, no, they're all my favorite. They're all my kids. No. But one that I would probably pick would be the saraband from number 4. And I had fun. I don't have it for today. You'll have to listen on the CD for it. But I had fun doing some overdubbing, multi-track editing to make different parts. We didn't mention, you had asked about the challenges, and the breathing I talked about. But I didn't talk about the other big challenge, which is that the cello can play 2 or 3 notes at a time, and the bass clarinet can't. And some of you may have noticed at the very end of the prelude, the first prelude, that da-da-dee, that the two top notes are sustained, and I can't do that live. The cello can, but I can't do that. So that's when I started to kind of enter into this world of multi-track recording, where I could actually play different parts and create the harmonies. So the 4th saraband has a lot of that, and that was really fun.
I want to just double back for a second. I actually previewed some music from the album this past Sunday morning on classical KUSC 91.5 FM on my Baroque show. And what I decided to do then, addressing myself to anyone who thought that this was anything but in the spirit of Bach, because it absolutely is, I preceded the selections from your album with one of his harpsichord concertos. And some people listening may know that virtually all of his harpsichord concertos were adapted from concertos for other instruments. So the idea of taking something written for one medium and transferring to another is very much Bach. And also when you talked about changing key, there is, for example, at least a couple of examples of things that were violin concertos that became harpsichord concertos a step lower because they didn't have enough keys on the top end to accommodate the original violin part. So I just want to make sure that everybody knew that what you have done is very much in the spirit of Bach, and he's somewhere saying, yeah, go for it, Josh. Couple of questions. I just took a peek at the Q&A window. And one question, a couple of people asked about the cover art. Where is that picture from?
Okay. Yes, this is really fun.
Can we see that again, Alexa?
Yeah,
could you put
yeah.
that up?
So, well, I'll talk about while he's getting it. So I had, before I even started this project, I had seen this photo of the inside of a cello done by some cello maker must have put a little camera inside of a cello and taken this picture. But it's credited to this Romanian photographer by the name of Adrian Borda. And I contacted him on Facebook and said, I'm doing a CD and I'd love to use this as a backdrop. And he said he was, thrilled. He was happy that, that I'd be interested in doing that. And he actually first started to kind of help me come up with some other designs to put in it. But I ended up, when I signed with Navona, which is actually, it's Parma Records is the company, Navona is their sub-label. So when I signed with Parma to make this happen, their art department started to work with me on I gave them this photograph and I said, I want to use this and I want to figure out how to put the words. And initially my idea was to put myself sort of in the middle, as if I was playing in the middle, as if I was playing in a hall, like a chamber hall that was the inside of the cello. But it always kind of looked a little bit cumbersome, and they came up with this cool idea of kind of a quasi watercolor in the wall of it, and then the lettering was all their idea. So shout out to Ryan Harrison and Edward, I forgot his last name, sorry, but I know Ryan Harrison did most of the work for this, and it was really fun. Really amazing. I was very amazed.
Let me also share a few more questions, as long as it seems like a suitable time. I don't want people to think that we're not covering the Q&A. And here's a question of great interest, I'm sure. Are we able to pre-order the CD?
Yes, maybe we could put the link up in the chat. It's on Amazon. There's a pre-order link on Amazon, so you can already plan to get the CD. And while you're on there, by the way, Amazon Smile has an opportunity to donate to the Pacific Symphony. Oh, so that would be a nice thing to do while you're there as well.
And it's already #1 among bass clarinet recordings, I understand.
Well, actually, it's classical. They have a category of classical suites.
I know. You climb in the. I saw. Another question. talking about reeds, do you have custom reeds made for you, or do you shop for them in stores that make reeds for a specific sound, or just order them in a package from the big box of reeds store?
Yeah, pretty much the latter. I just get them from a box of reeds, but I do work on them myself. I've learned how to kind of adjust them. I got to find a reed that's close, that has potential. I've learned how to find a reed that has potential. Occasionally, you find a reed that just sounds amazing right out of the box, and then I have to break it in a little bit so it's, you don't overplay it too much in the beginning. I went through so many reeds for this recording, as you could imagine, just tons and tons. And I tried a few different styles. It's all Van Duren. Van Duren is both my mouthpiece and my reeds. And they have a few different types. There's V12, V21, traditional blue box. And I went through all of them in slightly different strengths, and finally came up with my sweet spot, which was what I'd always played before, like traditional blue box fours. But yeah, I would often kill a reed after a few takes of a movement, and have to go start a new reed. So I went through a lot of reeds for this.
And here's an interesting question. Did the saxophone develop from the bass clarinet?
I actually don't know the answer. It's possible. It does sort of have a similar shape. Yeah, Alan, do you know? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I do know that Adolf Sax. Yeah, intended to have something that was played like a woodwind, but had the projection, of a brass instrument. So it's really a hybrid of brass and wood when we get down to it.
And I think Adolf Sax may have also been the creator of the bass clarinet, although I don't know if we know that for sure, but I vaguely remember.
Look into that.
We'll look that. I should know the answer to that.
We'll get back to you at Symphony Mixer number 44 for the answer for you. Let me ask you another couple of questions about your career, and if possible, we'll get back to another movement. But the fact is that you have had, as most musicians do. Oh, sorry. Before we get to that, there was one other question of interest to me, and I can't answer it. And the question was, are there any other couples in the Pacific Symphony?
Yes. Well, Tony and Cindy Ellis are piccolo, and am I missing? There were when we first joined the orchestra, there were Jim and Debbie Cantor, first and second clarinet players. There was Louise DeTuyo and Burnett Dillon, the principal flute and the principal trumpet couple in the orchestra. And then Cindy and Tony. Forgive me if I'm forgetting anybody else, but that's it that I can think of off the top of my head.
Okay. A question that came in, which I believe you answered: how do you play double stops that string instruments can? How do you play it on the clarinet? And that answer is with recording technology. We covered that one.
Yeah, I mean, you can arpeggiate. If I do it live and I can't do that, then you just go da-da-dee, and then you just hold the top note. But I figured I would go a little further with it. So.
And one more question before I have some more of my own for you. What does one reed cost?
Well, a box of bass clarinet reeds come in a box of 5. Clarinet reeds come in a box of 10, and a box of 5 is usually about $25-$30, and I usually maybe get 2 out of the 5 to work on average, something like that. So you can do the math, yeah. So it's not too bad. My wife teases me because she, aside from the fact that you can just buy them out of a box and pretty much play them, it's close to ready. She has to work from scratch, and she's just like, "Oh, it's so easy for you. It's not fair." So.
And bassoonists have it worst of all. I at one point found a photo of all the tools that a bassoonist must have to make and they can either buy them uncut or partially shaped or more fully shaped, and then take it from there. But that's,
And there are clarinet players. I have some colleagues that do work from scratch. They go from the cane, and I learned how to do that when I was at Aspen. Bill Jackson showed us in a master class how to go through. We have to have all the different equipment to go from scratch to make it work. And supposedly then you end up with more control over the reeds that you end up with, but it takes a lot of time that I just don't have the patience for. And if I found that I just couldn't get reeds out of the box to work, then I probably would, but fortunately.
Now, don't some, I guess, student players use plastic reeds?
Yeah, and they've actually gotten better. The technology's gotten a lot better. This Ligier, they're based up in outside of Toronto, and I went to their headquarters there many years ago. They've come up with a synthetic reed that works pretty well, and I have some students that sound one particular student sounds really good on the Legere, and we keep going back and forth between the Legere and the cane, and he's always sounding better on the Legere, and it's great. It's very consistent. So there's a lot of, and I think in Europe, I think Guy Legere is the head, and he went to Europe. He went to Vienna, and he started working a lot with some of the guys in Europe, and it's definitely getting more and more traction. I went through a period where I was playing on them, but I came back to cane. So,
all right, you're sort of Citizen Kane.
all
right, that's as good as it's going to get, folks.
All right.
To get back to what I was trying to bring up, and that is that, like just about all musicians, your career is multifaceted. So we're talking about your activities primarily now as an orchestral player and as a player of an orchestral instrument on this album. But aside from what you do with Pacific Symphony and LA Chamber Orchestra, what else rounds out your career?
So, well, I've ever since the early 2000s, I've been playing for some movie and TV stuff, film studio work, as we call it. I was lucky enough back in 2002 to have gotten kind of a really cool opportunity to play the bass clarinet part for John Williams' "Catch Me If You Can," and they kind of took me out of the blue cold, and I think they like what they heard from me, and I had a lot of fun during that session, that week of sessions. And then after that, I started getting more and more work over the years. It's not something that I ever would want to become the only thing in my career. I love doing it, but I also love playing in the orchestra, and then I also love teaching. Now I'm teaching at UCLA, and I love working with the students at UCLA. They're just so enthusiastic. And I learn from them as much as they learn from me. I feel like for me, being a teacher is just as much being a student, I think. So.
Yeah. The challenge, of course, of the film recording studio is you don't have all of the preparation time that you have with an orchestra, to work on your part and come in rehearsals, and you basically got to deliver the goods on the spot.
Yeah, it's a lot of sight reading, and you get better and better as you do it. But there's also some tricks. There's certain scales that come up all the time. There's what I call the octatonic or the diminished scale. Mm-hmm. It just seems to come all the time, and there's only 3 of them. So you can learn them, and you're good for a lot of the music. But you just learn the patterns, and you just get better and better at sight reading. We do sometimes get the music. John Williams sends the music in advance, usually, but not a lot in advance, and sometimes they'll change it right there on the spot, or they'll throw a cue at you that you don't have any time to look at beforehand. So that's definitely part of the challenge, but it's fun. It's a fun challenge.
I happen to have a number of favorite movements, and I thought maybe before we get too close to 6 o'clock, we might hear the Courant from number 2. Does that sound like a plan?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, this is was a fun one to record.
Okay. So here we go. Well, that seems like magic to me.
Thank you. It was fun. I mean, the magic is Bach. Just coming up with those lines and taking an instrument that's basically a one. For that, the courant, even on the cello, it's just one note at a time. But it just makes it. Sounds like there's so much more to it than just that.
It's amazing. Absolutely, I'm sure everybody agrees with that one. I also know that we're talking about your film career, and I know that we have something stylistically different that relates. That I believe you brought along a sample of a certain pickle.
Okay, so one of my most, shall we say, prominent moments in the film, in my film career, happened right before the quarantine. Actually, November 2019. I was asked to play a featured klezmer clarinet part in the film An American Pickle, featuring Seth Rogen, which came out last August on HBO Max. And the music was written by Michael Giacchino and Nami Melamud. Everybody knows Michael Giacchino. And then a young Israeli composer by the name of Nami Melamud, fantastic young Israeli composer, really up and coming. You're going to be hearing a lot more of her stuff. And she clearly was very comfortable with writing a lot of the Jewish klezmer style. For those that don't know the movie, it's about a guy from Eastern Europe who falls into a pickle vat and ends up waking up 100 years later and meeting his great-grandson and moving in with his great-grandson, both played by Seth Rogen, by the way. And so there's a lot of klezmer effects throughout the movie. So maybe Alexei, if you could play. So the opening passage has a fun, almost like a Rhapsody in Blue klezmer version of Rhapsody in Blue opening here.
It's very sweet.
Thanks.
So Michael Giacchino just asked you if you could do it? Is that
well? So the contractor for Michael Giacchino is a wonderful man named Reggie Wilson, and I've played for him for many years, principal and in the section. But in any case, so I just happened to be. He would have called me anyway, and then he said, "By the way, do you play any klezmer?" And I had actually, grew up with klezmer. We didn't get into this, but we talked about it in another recent interview. How klezmer was a big part of my life when I was younger, and then just more recently, starting with An American Pickle when I got back into it, and then recently with our wonderful Block by Block. If some of you saw the mixer back, 6-7 months ago with our whole group, Block by Block, and you may have heard some of the klezmer I play with them. That was my chance to really get back into playing klezmer. But it sort of started back up when he asked me, "Do you play some klezmer?" And I said, "Well, I used to play a lot, and I'd love to get back to doing it." So I was able to get the music in advance for this one, and I got some of the cues, and I was, I would record a little clip of a cue and send it to the orchestrator, Jeff Krika, and he would say, "Try it this way," or blah, blah, blah. And so that sort of helped me kind of get ready for it. But then it changed, when we got there. I was initially told to be like 60% klezmer, not full klezmer, but just a little bit of klezmer, kind of like Coco for the mariachi style, right. Just because that's also Giacchino, but not full. But then Nami came up to me on the last day when we were doing some more of the recordings. She said, "I want you to just really give me the full klezmer effect." So I did a little bit more for some of the other cues. So there's one other cue here that I thought would be fun to share. The track is called Klezmer Fight Club. And this is a scene where, for those that haven't seen it, where Seth Rogen, he's in New York. It's in the future. It's now in the modern day, and he's going to the site where his wife was supposed to be buried, and he and his wife were going to be buried on this site. And now it's underneath a freeway, in the middle of just nothing, and there's a big vodka sign, a Russian vodka sign on top of it, which is the worst thing possible when you're a Jew in Eastern Europe. Russian vodka. So he gets really mad when he sees this. So the beginning of the track starts where he's sort of building up his anger, and then you'll hear the klezmer clarinet representing him fighting these guys, the construction workers.
Wow. That is fun.
It was funny. In context, it's really funny.
Well, we are just a couple minutes away from 6. I just want to make sure, first of all, that everybody, well, any other questions out there? We might have time for 1 or 2 more questions from the group. I'll be looking at the Q&A and watching for anything there. But also, once again, to make sure that people know how to get your new album. So please do the pitch again.
Yeah, so Amazon, if you look on the chat, we've got the pre-order link on Amazon. And it'll be available. You can get the CD. It'll also be streaming on Spotify, Apple Tunes, Apple, and Amazon Music as well, starting on Friday. So, and I also want to just give it a shout out to thank President John Forsythe and Gene Ulrich for helping spread the word here, and also my sister orchestra over at LA Chamber Orchestra has been really incredibly helpful in getting this CD, making the CD a reality. So I want to give a shout out to Ben Cadwallader and Andrea Laguni, as well as the donors Leslie Lassiter and Ruth Eliel and Jerry and Terry Cole were incredibly supportive in helping me make this CD a possibility, and Anne Mullally. So thank you all.
Fantastic. And I also like to express our thanks to Alexei, who is in charge of making this whole webinar work and make sure that the audio that we wanted to hear got played. And my great thanks to Josh. Josh and I have had a great time sort of connecting over the last couple of weeks in connection with these Pacific Symphony events. So, let's keep it up. And thank you to everybody for coming. And we hope you enjoyed it and get the album. Have a good day.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.